Welcome to another program in our series, Senior Roundtable. I'm joined here today by our guest, Marit Brock, who has volunteered for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. She's been working since February 2013 in this volunteer position, and she's also one of the founding members of Moms Minnesota chapter. Marit is a gun violence survivor and a mom who wants to create a world where our children are safe from gun violence. Marit has served in a variety of roles in the Minnesota chapter and currently serves as volunteer chapter leader. A mom, a wife, and an executive in the healthcare industry. Welcome, Marit.
Thank you.
And may I introduce you to the other folks at the table? First of all, Dwayne.
Yes, I'm Dwayne King. I'm on the board of the DFL Senior Caucus. And since we're here also trying to form a Northwest chapter of the Senior Caucus, I thought I would sit in on this discussion today. And later on, perhaps I can cover some of the purposes of the caucus. Once again, my name is Dwayne King.
Good.
Bob Esno. I'm a precinct chair from Crystal, and I'm with the DFL precinct chair from Crystal. And I decided to join this caucus.
Good. Welcome.
I thought this was the first meeting, but I guess it's the second.
The second, yes.
Right. I'm Carol Rydberg, and I'm Associate Precinct Chair, Plymouth 15, and in Senate District 46.
Well, welcome to you all. And Marit, I'll ask a few of the questions, but others can chime in with their questions whenever you want. How did you get involved with the gun violence prevention?
I got involved with this movement for a couple of reasons. First, I'm a gun violence survivor. My brother died by suicide with a gun in 2001, and as I was working with the suicide prevention movement, really realized that here in Minnesota, easy access to guns and suicide go hand in hand. 80% of the gun deaths in Minnesota are suicides. So trying to prevent dangerous people or mentally ill people from getting guns is an important factor in preventing suicide. The other reason is because I'm a mom. My daughter was in first grade at the time of the Sandy Hook tragedy, and I couldn't sit by and watch my kids grow up in a world where they have to be fearful in their own school.
Oh, thank you, Marit. Now, I noticed that on the front of this, on one side of this, Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and on the other side, Every Town for Gun Safety. That Every Town for Gun Safety, that was formed by the mayors, was it not, initially?
That's right.
And it changed. What was the original name?
The original name was Mayors Against Illegal Guns, and it was founded by the mayors of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, and the mayor of Boston, really wanting to intervene on gun violence in their own cities.
And then Moms Demand Action. How old is that?
Moms Demand Action actually started just 2 or 3 days after the Sandy Hook tragedy. A mom
Where so many students were.
That's right, where 20 first graders and their teachers were killed during the school day. And a mom like me was brokenhearted and wanted to do something, so she started organizing on Facebook. I remember the day when I saw that Facebook page pop up, and just like me, hundreds of thousands of people across the country joined Moms Demand Action. So we moved from an online movement to a real world movement. And now we have over 3 million members across the entire country. About 2 years ago, we also joined forces with what's now Every Town for Gun Safety to be one unified body working from different angles, whether it's the grass tops or like Moms Demand Action, the grassroots, really trying to make change across the country.
Now, you mentioned a couple of things about the size of the problem of gun violence in Minnesota. Is there something more that you'd care to add to that? Is this primarily an urban issue, for example?
It is not. Minnesota is just like the rest of the country. We're really in a crisis. We see 90 people every day killed by gun violence in the United States. American kids are 11 times more likely to be killed by a gun than in any other developed country, and Minnesota is no different. The bulk of the gun deaths, as I mentioned, are suicide, and those are in greater Minnesota, where there are people who have access to guns, but they may not have access to mental health care. Here in the Twin Cities, we see day after day where there's domestic violence, where there's aggression against police officers by people, dangerous people who shouldn't have a gun. Those are some of the urban concerns, but they expand all over the state.
So how do you spread the word? How do you get more people involved?
We are a grassroots organization. We call ourselves the Grassroots Army of the Gun Violence Prevention Movement, and we spread the word really by talking to as many of our friends and family as we can. In the last 4 months, we've had nearly 100 events across the state of Minnesota, and they're in church basements or coffee shops or living rooms, really with friends and family talking to each other about what we can do to create a safer place. So much of what we do is start a different conversation where it's not quite so contentious and political, but really focused on solutions.
Dwayne?
Now, you mentioned that you were, I believe, the chair of the Minnesota chapter of the organization. What does that really mean? I mean, how does the chapter function, et cetera?
We have Moms Demand Action is nationwide. There's a chapter in every state and provides support from the national office to our state office. But we have also organized, I think, similar to the DFL Senior Caucus in geographic areas. So we have a group that works in Plymouth, or we have a group in Eagan and Bemidji, really trying to bring people together and spread the word, talk to local elected officials, and do our education.
And what's the process of forming those sub-chapters or whatever that you call those, Bemidji, et cetera?
Right, it's pretty informal. We start with 2 or 3 volunteers who are interested and willing to start calling their friends and family. And we have some staff people who can provide support to make sure that they know kind of what the best next step is. Otherwise, we're volunteers who are not giving up.
So do you experience, since you're doing it in greater Minnesota as well as the Twin Cities, what kind of pushback do you experience as you form your local chapters?
That's a great question. I think the biggest pushback that we have is people who just don't have information. There's an impression that the gun lobby is so powerful that there's nothing we could possibly do. And when we start talking about our gun safety presentations, or we start talking about really small steps that you can do to show up, call your legislators, talk to your elected officials, it changes from feeling like a huge insurmountable problem to something that people feel confident doing. Once we get past that barrier of information and the next steps, we really see pretty rapid growth. People feel great about it.
And Bob has a question.
Many years ago, I took a class called Gun Safety Training, and it was at the school and provided by, I don't know who, I think the NRA. Do they have anything to do with gun safety? Or is this anything like that? Or
we actually really focus on the responsibilities of adults. We have an educational program called Be Smart that starts with responsible gun owners and the steps they take. We use tips from the American Shooting Sports Foundation. I'm not an expert on gun safety, but they are, so we can provide people with tips. And then it also takes it a step further. So asking about guns in other people's homes. For example, if we're going to a cousin's house and they don't have small children around, or a grandparents' house, how can I ask about guns in their home? And also helping parents to recognize the risks of teen suicide. That's something we don't like to talk about, but the experts tell us that just the presence of a gun in a home can be a risk factor for teenagers and suicide by itself.
Is this just handguns, or is it rifles and
Right.
everything?
Any type of gun, right?
Because when I was growing up, everybody, in the closet in Dad's and Mom's room there was always a couple of guns, rifles usually, not handguns, but
Right.
not many people didn't have handguns, and but everybody had some kind of hunting rifle where I grew up. It's a little more rural there.
Well, I think we hear that a lot. Certainly from hunters, we hear that I'm a hunter, I'm a responsible person, I teach my kids how to be safe, and we absolutely support that. The world is different now, though, and our attitude about guns is different right now. So not everybody has that same kind of ingrained sense of safety, and we want to help with that.
So, what did you chose to focus on? Was it background checks?
Yes, we have an educational component of our work, and then we have a legislative advocacy component, and our legislative advocacy is really focused on expanding criminal background checks to all gun sales in Minnesota. And right now, people may not realize, but there's a big chunk, as many as 40% of gun sales, that are legal but are without background checks. So a criminal has easy access to a legal way to purchase a gun if they want to go that route. We didn't anticipate, I think, when the laws were put in place, the role of the internet for gun sales or gun shows, and now we need to close that loophole to make sure that all gun sales go through background checks. It's really startling. The reason why we chose it in part is because in the 18 states where there are criminal background checks on all gun sales, there's been a dramatic decline in gun deaths, on the order of 40% reduction of domestic violence that results in death by a gun, 40% or more fewer law enforcement homicides, 40% or more fewer gun suicides, and the list goes on and on. So we know that it's an easy way to make a difference, to save lives and keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people.
Well, I've heard people speak of a kind of analogy of the transportation safety people at the airport, and you expect people to go through there, but there's another way to get on board, and those. Could you clarify that metaphor that I've heard?
Yes, that if you were getting on a plane and you knew that there were two security lines, or two lines you could go through. One would take you through security, like we do currently, and the other required no security, but everybody ended up on the same plane. Would you feel safe? Would that be an adequate level of security? Right, that's right. Seems easy when you put it that way. There's some other public health comparisons that I think are really useful too. For example, we take for granted that mammograms will save lives from breast cancer, and the research tells us that that reduces breast cancer death by about 15%. So physicians say if you can do one thing that will reduce death by more than 40%, you should do that right now. That there are many good reasons to do that.
A lot of mammograms, that stops maybe 15%, but we're talking about something that stops 40% of the deaths.
That's right.
A lot more.
Really effective prevention.
Now, we have a lot of hunters in Minnesota. Are they involved with your group?
Yes. In fact, hunters that get involved with us are really responsible gun owners. They want to make sure that guns are not in the hands of dangerous people. They want to make sure that people are properly trained. And they really are glad to have a place where they can say, yes, I support the Second Amendment and I support safety, and I want to be involved in a group that's doing constructive work. I think part of our polarization is we've got the gun lobby, and then we have other groups, and we'd like to be that 90% of Americans who agree with us, we want them with our group.
Well, at the hearing, at the Senate hearing, I think we heard that wasn't it Senator Ron Latz advocating his bill before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and 80% of NRA members support background checks?
Nationwide, that's true. And there's a Star Tribune poll about background checks that said 82% of Minnesotans support expanding criminal background checks, so it's pretty common.
I'm curious, Marit, because the elephant in the room probably is the gun lobby that you brought up.
Right.
And how is it that you have enough nerve to kind of take on this adversary, assuming that it is an adversary?
Well, certainly there's the belief, and I think it's true, that the NRA is very powerful and the gun lobby shows up, but we're moms and we've got the right to show up and protect our children, so we do. What's different, and what we're doing that's different maybe than what's happened in the past, is we want to have a really clear message about our goals. The NRA has a very clear message about what they are trying to accomplish, and we want to do the same. We want to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people. We want our kids to grow up in a safe Minnesota. The other thing that we want people to do is show up. The gun lobby is able to mobilize people. We're now at a place with our membership where we're able to mobilize people, but we want more. We want to make sure that when there's an issue that comes before our state legislature, that people at least call their elected officials. When there's local issues that came up, there's an issue at the Plymouth City Council recently, and we were able to fill the room with people who really care about these issues. So clear message and having people take
Grassroots,
action.
right?
That's right, yeah.
Thank you. Carol, you were at the Plymouth City Council meeting, were you not?
Yes.
And
Yes.
when there was a room full of moms demand action against guns, for gun sense in America.
That's right. We
What-
were showing support actually for our chief of police. Our chief of police had gone to our city council and asked them to include the bill, Senator Latz's bill, expanding the background checks in one of their priorities. And they had done that, but somebody, a gun owner who disagreed with it, came to the following meeting, and what resulted was that the Plymouth City Council reversed their previous position. And then many of us showed up and filled the place. There wasn't an empty seat, with people who were questioning why they had reversed that position of support for the background checks. And some of us met with individual council people also the next week. And it does, all these polls show us that 90% of the people support this, and yet it seems that our legislators are scared to death to do anything that might anger this activist group of people who see any change, any expansion of checks as a threat that somebody's going to show up at their door and take away their gun.
And that's not what you're advocating.
That's definitely not.
The only people I ever hear discuss taking away guns are the gun lobby themselves. They bring this up all the time, and as if they are so afraid of this happening. And to be honest with you, sometimes I think about this and I think, who has anything to gain by keeping gun owners so afraid that any change is going to mean confiscation of your weapons? And the one party I can see that gains from this are the gun manufacturers. while most of us, the day after Sandy Hook, were just in grief over the thought of all these innocent young lives lost. And yet I believe I read that that day following the Sandy Hook shootings set a record for gun sales. And again, I was told it was because they feared that because of that act, that their guns would now be at risk and that there'd be a change in the philosophy and that somebody would come and take away their guns.
Not true.
It's not true, and they're being manipulated.
Yeah.
Right.
And you're part of the education that you're conducting throughout Minnesota is to help people realize that's not what we're talking about.
That's right. In fact, we're really specific about that. We are not anti-gun. We support the Second Amendment, and we believe that with rights come responsibilities. And it's reasonable to ask gun owners to be responsible toward the rest of society.
Bob, did you have another question?
I was, you are a national organization. Have you done anything nationally? I kind of had a little bug in my ear because foreign countries can import guns to the United States and sell them, have no troubles that I know of, really. But if we were to, Colt or Remington or whatever wanted to sell guns in their country, I mean, they would go crazy, and they would, no, you can't do that. They would keep them out.
Right.
But, why do we allow them in if, foreign companies to sell surplus, even surplus military guns, but
That
United
sounds like
States
an
can-
international trade problem.
yeah,
rather than
well, it is kind of.
rather than a gun
Yeah.
safety problem.
Well,
Well,
that's a lot of the automatic, guns come from foreign countries, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
Well, our approach, particularly through our legislative advocacy, is to start at the local level. And just like other movements that have been successful, smoking, the marriage equality, starting locally and getting enough of a groundswell, whether it's state law or other pressure nationally, will help change the federal law. Certainly our goal is to have criminal background checks on all gun sales be a nationwide policy. It's harder to influence Washington, D.C. from Minnesota, though.
Now, the legislative session being over, what is your group doing in preparation for the next session and the election?
We are taking this issue to the voters. We are asking Minnesotans to be gun sense voters and talking more to people, particularly in certain districts where we either have a candidate who's very supportive or we would like to put pressure on an incumbent. We'll be out knocking on doors, making phone calls, supporting candidates. We do expect to have an endorsement process statewide, and we'll be publicizing that probably in July. And a good way for people to get involved over the summer and into the election season is to help us make phone calls, knock on doors, and support candidates.
Well, and contact their legislator and candidate.
That's right.
So
Let them know you care.
If someone has never contacted their legislator before, how do they get started with Moms Demand Action?
Well, we can certainly help. Contacting momsdemandaction.org will get you connected with our local group. And one thing we've learned is picking up the phone and making a personal request to a legislator is really effective. We hear from legislators that, the online petitions are fine, but when I talk to somebody who lives in my district who tells me why they care about this issue in their own words, that means much more than the online petitions. So even if your words aren't perfect, making that personal connection is incredibly valuable as a first
It's
step.
really worth their time.
It's very worth their time, definitely.
Now the small sort of subtitle to the name of your organization, and you've mentioned this a couple of times, is for gun sense in America. Just to let me wrap my head around a little bit, what how do you summarize what good sense about guns really stands for?
Really common sense regulations that will keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people is what gun sense means to us. And I don't know if we created that term, but we like it. We are interested in following data. We have a lot of research to support the actions that we take to make sure that if we're putting our energy into a particular topic, that it will have an impact, that it really will keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people. It really will save lives, keep our kids safe.
So background checks fits in there
That's right.
in what way?
Well, background checks fits in because we know from other states that it's so effective, that we can easily expand our current law. It's not creating new law. It's not creating unfunded mandates. It's accessible to people in Minnesota. And we know that greater than 40% reductions in gun deaths have occurred in those states that have criminal background checks as the law.
Marit, there's a lot of research on your website, is there not?
There is. Actually, Everytown for Gun Safety at everytown.org has a tremendous amount of really terrific studies,
So-
publications, infographics.
So everytown.org,
That's right.
and a lot of research there that Moms Demand Action are relying upon.
That's right. Fascinating information about what's out there.
Now, we've just got less than 3 minutes left, so, Bob, you have a question?
What is the main argument of opposition people to your?
You know, I think it's really like Carol said, that it's just the first step down a slippery slope. What we really find connects with people is this idea, setting aside the gun lobby and the real kind of gun rights extremists, most Minnesotans agree with reasonable laws that responsible people can follow without too much of a burden. And we find, again, once we start talking about it, most Minnesotans, regardless of their political party, whether or not they're a hunter, whether or not they like guns, really agree that criminal background checks are a good step to take in Minnesota.
Do you get the old argument, you're not going to get them all, or
We do, and certainly we know that
some way they're going to get them?
one thing that we do isn't going to stop all death. It's not going to stop every crime. But when we have compelling data, we feel like we should act on that.
Yes.
So Marit, this again is an effort to form a chapter out here of the DFL Senior Caucus. And you've been so good in answering questions here today for seniors. I'm wondering, we have existing 8 chapters already. Are you available to speak to some of our other metro area chapters if they would invite you?
I would love that opportunity. And we have other volunteer speakers like me that I work with all the time who could speak in greater
Throughout the
Minnesota.
state?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, across the state,
We sure do, yep.
yeah.
So we're coming to the end, less than a minute. I just want to thank you, Marit.
Thank you
for
for great questions.
and all of you for good questions that Marit has responded to. Thank you for tuning in to this session of Seniors Roundtable. Tune in again next month.